As we celebrate the Sestercentennial anniversary of the city of Westminster, we're also celebrating the city's oldest families. We're here with Evelyn and Caroline Babylon to discuss the origins of their family. So Caroline, tell us a little bit about how your family came to Westminster and Carroll County.
Well, if you start with Carroll County, the records that we have show that the pioneer Babylon was Philip, and he settled near Uniontown somewhere around 1775. He had 3 children, Philip, Andrew, and Peter, and my family comes out of Peter's line. Peter, to my understanding, also lived in Uniontown, and then his youngest son was Josiah, who was born in Uniontown, but then married and moved to Frizzleburg. So my great-grandfather was born in Frizzleburg, but moved to Westminster at about the age of 20, which was in about 1877. So that was after the Civil War. He would have been about 10 or so when the Civil War occurred, and he would have seen traffic going from here to Tawnytown. But he moved into town. He was already known at the age of 20 as a very hard and industrious worker. He had worked in a store in Frizzleburg, and he came into Westminster to work in stores in town.
So what types of stores did he have here?
First he worked in a brickyard and some other stores, but eventually it became a wholesale store, so he brought in products from Baltimore, I'm sure, and resold them. It was mostly consumer type goods and farm goods.
Now the railroad, I assume, really helped his business. Was that a reason you think perhaps they settled here in Westminster?
I would think so, because the railroad, although it arrived before the Civil War, it didn't really become busy for commercial traffic till afterwards, so the timing would make sense on that.
Now, the Babylon building, the modern day Babylon building, is that the place where his store was?
Eventually. He worked for some other people at first and then went into partnerships, and eventually started a partnership known as Aubon Babylon, and that is what built the store in 1896. So when he first moved to town, we understand he lived on Pennsylvania Avenue, but eventually he lived basically across the street from the Babylon building in what we know as I think it's Clarabelle Hotel. So that was his residence, I think, at the end of his life.
So you say he was an industrious worker. Why do you think he decided to go the way of being a merchant?
I'm not sure I can hypothecate on that one, but it certainly is what he started doing back in Frizzleburg. And he became very diverse in his interests, although he put a lot of time into Aubon Babylon. That actually downsized later and moved up the street, we think, like where Cal Bloom's is now. And his son, my great-grandfather, David Snyder Babylon, who was known as Snyder, then started Babylon and Lippy, which was a retail establishment in the Babylon building then.
What do you think your family's biggest impact on the city of Westminster has been?
Well, I think through Frank Thomas Babylon, I can think of at least 2 major ones. One is through the store and through real estate investments. They owned a lot of real estate throughout town, and Aubon Babylon continued to accumulate and manage that until 1988. So that was almost a 200-year history of real estate in the town. And when you look back at the records and you go, oh, I know that property, Aubon Babylon owned it. A lot of them up Pennsylvania Avenue, a lot out John Street. The family owned what we now think of as William Winchester. They had a farm out there, and that wasn't, to my knowledge, Frank himself, but and helped with properties out that way. So Aubon Babylon owned quite a few properties out there. The other, though, was banking. That Frank Thomas Babylon was active in the Westminster Savings Bank. He was a director and eventually became president of the Westminster Savings Bank, and that continued down through the years as well.
So Westminster Savings Bank became There's been so many banks since
There have
then.
been.
So is that bank still in existence today?
No.
Okay.
No, that eventually became Carroll County Bank.
Oh, okay, there you go. So what other things, I mean, your family has also really been a great component of the philanthropy and the community service in town. What other things could you say about that with regard to your family history?
Well, certainly the family has a history of supporting the church, and Frank Thomas Babylon was a member of Grace Lutheran Church, which my family is still today. Active with the fire department. We've had different members active there. Warfield Babylon, who is a cousin through that same lineage, was very active with the fire department, and of course my father was.
And you are as
also,
well.
and I am too, yes.
So tell us a little bit about the first business that was in the Babylon building.
Well, the first one I know about is the Albaugh Babylon Grocery Company. That was a wholesale grocery company, and later on they moved up the street to about where Cal Bittner's is now. But they would send the groceries out into various counties. They went as far as Frederick County, and we once ran into a grocer up near Sibyllsville who said, "Oh, they used to come here." This is kind of fun, isn't it? But so that's, but then when that sort of died down, or I don't know how they got out of it sort of, but they had a lot of real estate then, which was sort of all over Westminster, various places that they owned. And they became just a holding company. When I came to town, they were just a holding company. And eventually it dissolved in 1988, even the holding company did.
So what about Babylon and Lippy?
Oh, well, Babylon Lippy was my father-in-law. I didn't know him very long, but he was apparently a very nice, mild-tempered man, and he and Mr. Lippy owned a dry goods business in the Babylon building. And David, my husband, used to say that you could go in the downstairs of the Babylon building and you could pick out the fabric you wanted and go upstairs, and they would measure you, and they would make up your suit, dress, hat even, whatever you wanted. So that was the Babylon Lippy Company.
So how long was that there?
Oh, that was not there when I came to town. I'm an import.
And where are you from?
Reading, Pennsylvania. I was reared there.
That's wonderful. And then you moved to Willis Street.
We moved there in 1954. We first lived on Main Street, where the BB&T Bank is right now.
Okay.
It was at the end of John Street before John was moved to join in with Bond. And we could look right down John Street.
Now tell us a little bit about Albaugh.
Albaugh? Well, George W. Albaugh lived in the Longwell House, which is now City Hall. And my husband tells about the fact that he used to live there, and apparently he had some farm animals, that kind of thing. I'm just guessing from what some of it, because David used to tell us about putting water on it. They could make a really good sled when he was a kid. But George W. Albaugh had a daughter who married, and that daughter and husband died in the flu epidemic of 1918, I believe it was. And they had a daughter, Mariana. They had that couple who died, and they had another one too. But Mariana married a Billingsley, and George Billingsley was a son, and he's done some work in the historical things of Westminster, I believe, George.
So what would you say is the biggest contribution of the Babylon family to Westminster?
Oh, just living it and enjoying it, maybe. I don't know.
That's a fabulous answer.
But yes, David, as my daughter mentioned, my husband David was very active in many community things, and he enjoyed people, and he'd go out and talk. Boy, talk about networking, he did it. and so that led him into doing many of the charitable things that he did, and into those, that kind of thing.
So tell us about the lineage from F. Thomas Babylon.
Well, F. Thomas married Ellen Snyder. Eleanor, I guess, was her real name. And incidentally, the Snyders, her parents, had a general store in Cranberry, because Caroline has a poster of when they went out of business. We didn't bring that along. But anyway, that was the Snyders. But anyway, F. Thomas had the son, was David Snyder, S-N-I-D-E-R, and they called him Snyder, and I can't tell you why. And Snyder and his wife, Marion Cover Babylon, and I think the Covers were from Wakefield Valley, something like that. Or maybe they were from Frizzleborough, not sure about the Covers, but the Marion Cover and David Snyder had 3 children, Eleanor, Thomas, and David. David was my husband, who came on a little behind, but he was there. Eleanor, incidentally, worked at Mather's department store in the baby department. And that was when you paid your bill, you put it in this thing, and they hung it on the wire, and it went phew, and then it would come back. That was fun.
Well, I think that the Babylon family has had a hand in every merchant in downtown Westminster.
Not quite.
It's so fabulous, yes. Mather's was a great department store.
It really was.
Indeed.
We all still miss it.
Me too, absolutely. Well, your family certainly for generations has been such an important part of Westminster, so thank you so much.
Well, we're certainly delighted to help out in this history.
William B. Thomas and Rebecca Fenton Thomas lived at 83 East Main Street. The building was both their residence and office. In the 1930s, the building was torn down to build the new post office. Mr. Thomas was a banker and broker and the father of W. Frank Thomas. Thomas Bennett and Hunter, or TBH, was founded in 1909 by W. Frank Thomas, Joseph H. Hunter, and Benjamin F. Poole to build roads to carry anticipated traffic from the newly popular automobile. Mr. Poole retired in 1914 and was replaced in the partnership by John Bennett. TBH built many of the early roads in Carroll County, as well as roads and bridges in central and western Maryland, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia. In the early days of road building, contractors made their own concrete at the job sites. Capitalizing on that experience, TBH entered the ready-mixed concrete business in 1939, and it now operates plants in Carroll and Washington County. TBH was incorporated in 1935, with Mr. Bennett serving as its first president. Since the founding of the company, each owner has been a worker at the company. TBH is especially proud that among the ranks of current employees are members of the third generation of families working in the business. A little-known fact is that the Yingling family came here in the early 1700s, predating even William Winchester. We're here with John Yingling to talk about the history of his family. So tell us a little bit about how the Yinglings came to Westminster.
First, Missy, thank you for inviting me here. It's an absolute honor. They migrated from central Pennsylvania down into central Maryland. Our family had roots in Pleasant Valley, Maryland. We have a 250-acre farm there still that's presently owned by the family. Joe Yingling was probably quite an entrepreneur. He had a cider mill, an ice cream factory, a bank, and a telephone company.
One man.
One guy.
That's amazing.
He was an amazing person. Toby Yingling was my dad's father. He was a banker and a farmer also. My dad was a farmer. He served in World War II. In England, he was a small plane instructor. And then they sent him to Fort Sill, Oklahoma to finish his training. He ended up as a staff sergeant in the Army. His brother Dennis was a colonel in the Armored Division in Africa during World War II. My dad joined the family business of Carol Crawford. Carol Crawford came and started the family business in 1919. Dad came in 1954 and joined the business, and I came in 1976. and joined the business. We're a good mix of farm people and entrepreneurs, I should say, to describe the family best.
I definitely think that's the case with the plethora of different businesses. And it also seems like you see a lot of different Yinglings all over town. Are you all related?
I don't know. There's so many of them in Carroll County, and we have so many relations with many other families in Carroll. It seems like they're kind of mixed together. We had, most of them were farm people, and there's several citizens that were mixed with.
So tell us a little bit about the origin of Crawford Yingling Insurance.
My grandfather, Kel Crawford, on my mother's side, started the business. He went down on Main Street at the railroad tracks and sold policies to people coming up from Baltimore on the railroad. My father came along in 1954 and joined the business, and then I came in 1976 and joined the business.
Your grandfather Crawford was also an appraiser.
Yes, yes. Probably his most prominent project was the Liberty Dam area, that whole area that he appraised for the state of Maryland, and he appraised for many, many organizations in the state, as did my father.
So for generations, the Yinglings have been here in town. What do you think the greatest contribution of the Yingling family is to the heritage?
I said that at my father's funeral. I'm most proud of the family for the service to their country. Both were in the military, as I said before. Definitely, I'm very, very proud of that accomplishment.
Now, do you know of any presence during the Civil War, since they were here since the early 1700s? Did they see the troops going through, or do you have any knowledge of that?
I don't, other than historical markers that are in the city. I do not at all.
Okay.
No.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's good. Your father mentioned insurance being sold on the street next to the railroad. So tell us a little bit about how it transitioned from that to bricks and mortar as we see today on Main Street.
I can imagine it was a great experience for my great-grandfather and grandfather at the time. You know, I believe that they were heavily involved in local service organizations, specifically the Westminster Rotary Club, and, you know, developing relationships with people through service in the community, multiple committees, boards they sit on is how they grew the business. You know, transferring to a brick and mortar, you know, I know we always had an office. I don't exactly know where it was, but I'm sure it was very exciting, and a lot of the principles that they used back then we use today to grow our business.
Your family continues to be very involved in service organizations and networking. In fact, I've read that Crawford Yingling Insurance is the oldest continuing member of the Chamber of Commerce, which is celebrating its 90th anniversary this year. So tell us a little bit about how you deal with the Chamber of Commerce and what that means to you.
Well, yes, you know, we're very proud to be, you know, long-standing members of the Chamber of Commerce, and really what the Chamber of Commerce means to me is about developing relationships. I think business is very much about strong relationships, whether you're doing business with somebody or not. You know, we just want to continually keep open relationships, and, you know, the Chamber has served our business well, and you know, I'm privileged to be sitting on the board of directors of the Chamber. And yes, you're right, the 90th anniversary is coming up, and I know we're having a big gala in October. I think the theme is the Roaring 20s, you know, since it was established in 1924, I believe.
Well, how appropriate for you having the business start in 1919, that it's just part of your business from the get-go. So what do you think the difference was from the start of the 1919 business to today? What do you think the insurance business, how has it changed other than the obvious computer?
Well, that's a tough question, and I'll try to answer it as best I can without going off on huge tangents. It's evolved and it's been commoditized a lot. As you see, there's a lot of competition on the, you know, you see all sorts of lizards on the television, and they're saying, hey, save, save, save. But, and that's a challenge. I mean, in any business, as business evolves, you're going to have different challenges. You have to overcome them. So really, we try to say, let's kind of decommoditize the insurance, because you really do want to understand what you have and know that you have an advocate. When something happens, somebody's going to be there for you, and that was the whole premise of insurance. So the product that itself hasn't really evolved, but the way it's being marketed and distributed certainly has, I mean, because of technology.
So I can imagine that your great-grandfather was committed to service as you are, and just that whole part is bringing you forward to today. So,
Yeah, it's you know, I'm a member of the Westminster Rotary Club. You know, sit on a lot of different boards and committees. I'm very you know, privileged to have a strong name like Crawford Yingling behind, you know, what we're doing, and I'm very much enjoying. I look forward to being in the community and involved for hopefully decades to come.
well, outstanding. So the generations of Yingling are going to continue from the past to the future. So thanks so much, Ben.
Thank you for having me, Missy.